Hi and welcome to the video supplement to my TuneTorial on screen by 21 Pilots. Just to give you all a short introduction, my name is Victor, I'm a student at Northwestern and I'm helping out with the TunePad project. Like I mentioned in my tutorial itself, 21 Pilots are one of my favorite artists of all time, and Screen is a perfect song to recreate in TunePad because of its repetitive nature. If you're a fan of 21 Pilots' latest stuff like Stressed Out or Heathens, I would highly recommend you check out their older albums too. There's a lot to like. In this video, we'll be looking at the piano part specifically, but if you want some tips and advice on the drums, feel free to check out the rest of the text tutorial. Before we get started, I do want to preface and say that this tutorial is geared towards those with a little bit of musical background and want to learn how that translates to code. That being said, I'll try and do my best to define as much as possible, and if there are any portions of the tutorial that are confusing, I would also recommend checking out some other tutorials that are available on the website. There's a lot of good content. With that out of the way, let's get right into it. The very first thing we'll want to do for our TunePad project is to set the tempo or speed of the track. It defaults to 120 beats per minute, which it says right here. Let's go ahead and change that to 150 because that's the tempo screen. Okay, the next thing we'll want to do is create a definitions instrument. But to understand why that might be helpful, let's first take a look at the play note function. Okay, play note is a command that tells TunePad to play a note. Let's see what this sounds like. One thing that might be unclear here is what these numbers mean. The first number corresponds to the pitch of the note that you want to play. As you can see on the piano, C60 corresponds to C4. And here, for beats, 1 corresponds to 1 beat or a quarter note. If you're used to playing an instrument, typing 60 when you actually mean C4 can get annoying really quickly. And the solution for that is a definitions instrument, which we can insert right now. Okay, all you need to do is move this to the top and then type in C4 equals 60. And just like that, whenever we write C4, TunePad will know that we mean 60. And we can test that right here. As you can see, it still sounds the same. You'll need to do this for a lot of different notes if you want the same convenience for all of them. I did that already, so I'm going to go ahead and just copy paste that into my definitions instrument. And you're free to do the same if you want. You can go ahead and copy them for my text tutorial. One thing though, I didn't define every note available simply because I didn't need all of them. Since Screen is in the key of C, we didn't need any flats or sharps. That being said, if you do need them, you can define them exactly the same way, and I recommend you try that on your own when you're working on a different song. And by the way, you don't need to say note equals or beat equals every time you call the play note function. We can just have the number here, like so. And I'll be using this shorthand from time to time, but don't be confused, it's exactly the same as before. Now that we have the definition set, we can actually get into coding the song. If you listen to the original, you might notice that it's pretty repetitive, and there are ways we can code our TunePad project to take advantage of that fact. If you write out every single note of the first couple measures, it'd look like this, and sound like this. If you're observant, you'll notice that the two sections right here and right here are exactly the same, except the very first note. In this case, we can define a function that'll make this a little more concise. You can call a function almost anything you want, but I called mine intro pattern 1, and it would look like this. Okay, This section right here is the section that repeats. So let's put that into our function. This top line is just telling TunePad that we want to define a function called intro pattern 1, and the rest of the lines are what we want intro pattern 1 to mean, or what we want it to play every time we call it. Since calling intro pattern 1 is now the same as the repetitive part that we were looking at before, we can simplify the rest of the piano portion to look like this. It should still sound exactly the same, and we can test it by playing it again. And with that, we're done with that little section. The next section, when written out, looks like this and sounds like this. But again, we can make that a little better by defining another function that I called intro fill1. And we can do that now. Define intro fill1. And we'll want to use the repetitive portions like before. And we'll have to replace the repetitive portions just the same way we just did with the first part. And it should still sound the same. Awesome. There's one last section for the piano melody, and it looks like this when written out. And it sounds like this. So there aren't any patterns that we can take advantage of here. But that being said, we can still make this a function just to make the final product a little bit easier to read. And I'll call it intro fill2. Define intro fill2, and let's tab this all over. In the context of one small little section, writing a function here doesn't really make anything easier to read, especially once you have to call it down here. But once you have a lot of code written, it will be very helpful. And let's go ahead and see how that works by combining the three instruments that we made into one single instrument. So I'm going to go back to instrument piano 2, cut and paste into piano 1, and the same for instrument 3. And let's see what it sounds like. Cool, right? Now that our piano instrument is done, let's incorporate what we made into the timeline section of TunePad. You can do that by clicking the three dots here to access your instrument settings and clicking Add to Timeline. Now, the music that we just made is in the timeline portion of our TunePad dropbook. You have some additional options here. You can change the volume of your track, and you can also click on the music itself to click either fill right or fill full, and that essentially loops what you just made until the end of your timeline. The timeline is pretty powerful because once you make some other instruments or you make some other parts for your song, you can add them all to your timeline, and you can have them playing at once, or you can have them play and switch intermittently to make a full-fledged song rather than just one instrument. If you want to flesh out screen and add some drums or add some ukulele, the timeline will be where you can combine them all. That being said, that should be it for this video tutorial. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me or the rest of the TunePad team, and check out some of our other tutorials.